Hey, this is Jesper from Velocity Peak, and in today's Cinema 4D and X Particles tutorial, we're gonna make this. So this is kind of sand logo reveal effect. And if you want to follow along, all the project files are available on velocitypeak.com. Okay, let's jump in. Okay, so let's begin. Someone asked me a while ago how I could reveal a logo from like a sand texture. So this is the technique that I came up with. So let's start by adding a plane. And let me go to View, Frame Default. And let me see the line. So ND to show the geometry. Now this technique is based on displacement. We're going to use 3 different displacement maps. And then we're going to art direct that with vertex maps. And vertex maps are resolution dependent, so let's up the resolution here. And I'm going to make this smaller. Just 200 by 200 is going to be enough. And let's do 60 by 60. And if I hit O, I can frame this. So that's going to be enough resolution. And in the end, we're not going to show the geometry itself. This is just going to be the base for the particles. It's going to drive the particles. And, I am going to make this editable. So let's hit C on the keyboard. And let's go to the Phong angle, this Phong tag here, and just bring that up all the way to 180. That's not going to make a big difference in the end, but it's just going to look a little smoother in the viewport. Okay, so the next step is let's add the first displacement. And let's make that a child of the plane. And this is going to be the first in a series of 3. So let's call this one the base displacement. And let's go to the Object tab. I'm going to reduce the size to 8. Instead of intensity centered, which pushes things in 2 directions, up and down, I'm going to do intensity, which only pushes it in 1 direction. And with a positive value here, it's going to push it outwards, which is what I want. Let's hide the lines. We don't need to see them anymore. So NC. And then let's go to shading, and I am going to add a noise. Let's go into the noise. Let's get some space so we can see a little better. Now I'm going to leave all the colors at default. The seed is fine. The noise type as noise is fine. I'm just going to bring up the scale, the global scale, to around 155. And then for the relative scale, I'm just going to tighten up the X to around 75. And then I want to stretch this out on the Z. And let's go all the way to 300. So in the end, the camera angle is going to be something like this. So I want to have it stretched out like that. And let's animate this. Not a lot, just 0.2. And let's bring up the contrast. There's a little bit more contrasty. Something like that's going to be enough. Now, if I play this, it's going to be very subtle. Maybe from a different angle, you can see. So there's just a little bit of movement. So that's a good first step. Now, the second step is to add the logo displacement now. So if I select a plane, hold down the Shift key, I can add another displacer. And let me drag that underneath the first one. The order for the displacers make a difference. So I'm going to call this one logo. Now, for the type here, I am going to reduce that height to 5. And I'm going to use intensity again. So it's only going in 1 direction. But for the shading, instead of a noise, I'm going to go to shader and I'm going to say color. And by default, it's going to give us this white color, which is perfect. So everything is pushed up with whatever the height is. So 5 centimeters. Now, to control this, we're going to use a vertex map. And we're also going to use a logo or a spline. So let me just show you that. So the logo spline here, if I unhide that, you can't see it. It's at the bottom here. It's right there. So let's first make a vertex map. Make sure you're in polygon mode with no polygon selected, and go to select, and then set vertex weight. And value of 0 is perfect, so let's hit OK. Let's select that guy, and let's call it VM for vertex map logo. And we want to use fields. So let's select fields, and let's get rid of the freeze layer. And instead, we're going to use this logo spline. So let's drag it in. And we have an undesired result. Well, let's fix that. So let's select the logo spline. And the spline shape is set to curve. I'm going to switch that to mask. And in mask, we need to tell it what plane to project along. So instead of Z, let's do Y. So now we can see the outline of our logo. Now I want to make this really tight. So I'm going to bring down the distance to 2. This is really tight. So of course we don't see any displacement yet. So we need to tell the displacer to use this logo. So let's go to the displacer logo and to the fall off. And then let's just bring in the vertex map. And now we have something. Now it looks a little janky on the sides here, but remember, we're not going to use this in the end. We're not going to display the geometry. We're going to use this as a driver for particles. So that's absolutely fine. So I want to animate this on and off. And I'm going to use a spherical field to do that. So let me go to my fields list and add a spherical field. And let's also create a folder for it. So fields, and just stick it in there. And I want to go back to displacer logo, and it was added by default there. So I'm going to take it away from the displacer fall off. And instead, I'm going to go to my vertex map and make sure it's added there, and it is. And I want to make it smaller. So instead of 100, let's make it 75. And then let's go back to the vertex map, and instead of a blending mode of max, let's set this to clip. So it's only going to be active inside of this spherical field. So if I drag this around, you can see the effect. So I'm going to animate it on and off, or in fact, off and then on. So on frame, let's go to frame 106. And then just going to set a couple of values here. So I'm going to set the X to be -39 and set a keyframe. And then let's do Z. Let's do that to 81. No, in fact, I don't want to do that. I took the wrong values here. Let's do -24 keyframe, and let's do -37 keyframe. So this is going to be the end position. And then let's go to frame 45. And then just going to switch up these values. I'm going to set X to be -39 keyframe and Z to be 81. So it's up there. And if I play this back, now this is what we get. Now I also want to add just a little bit of irregularities, if you will. I want to add a noise on top of this. So I'm going to add another field. Let's go to the fields list, and I'm going to add a shader field. And let's put that in the fields folder. Let's go back to our vertex map. I just want to make sure it wasn't added to this one as well. It wasn't. Okay, so to combine these now, I'm going to make a folder. So I'm going to create a folder. And in fact, before I do that, let's set up the noise. Let's set up the noise first. Come on, get out of there. Let's delete that one, do it again. So let's set up the noise first, just so we see what's going on. So let's go into the shader for the noise, and let's add a noise. Let's go into the noise. And I'm going to leave most things at default, except just bring up the scale a little bit. But I'm really going to crank up the contrast to almost 100, right? Around 90 is going to be good. right? So it's really contrasty. So now to combine this noise with a spherical field, remember we used clip for the spherical field. Now I'm going to create that folder. I know it's so difficult to get rid of in the last step. So I'm going to put the spherical field at the bottom in this. And I'm going to change the spherical field to normal now. And to have the shader field operate on top of the spherical field, I'm going to set this to overlay. And then I'm going to set the folder itself to clip. So if I play this back, you're going to see that the noise is now interacting with the spherical field. So it's just not as perfect anymore. So that's good. So we're getting some places. So the next step now is I want to have just a little bit more irregularities. I want to have another noise that is traveling from the right to the left and sort of just give some more complexity to the whole thing. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to take this displacer base and I'm going to hold down Control and just drag it down. And I want to have the logo noise being the last noise. Or it's not a noise, the displacement, I should say. Now this is just going to be, I'm going to call this one ring, because I'm going to use a ring spline to do this. So under the object for this, I am going to take down the height to 4, so it's not so intense. Leave it at intensity. I'm going to go to the shading, into the noise, and I'm going to bring up the scale to say 550, so it's a lot bigger. And now I'm going to bring up the relative scale to 100 by 100, like so. And I want to have the animation speed here as well, but let's make it a little quicker so they're not exactly the same. And I'm going to leave most things as they are. I just want to bring in some more blacks here, so maybe around 20 or so. And it's a little hard to see any of this. If I just solo this noise, you can see that this is a really subtle noise. So now I'm going to add a vertex map. So let's select the plane. Make sure no polygons are selected. Let's go to select. And then set vertex weight. Again, 0. And let's make sure we're not confused about which one is which now. So VM, I'm going to call this one ring noise. And let's go to this and use fields and get rid of the freeze. Now I'm going to add a spline. I'm going to add a circle spline. It's way too big. So let's set it to 50. And on the plane, let's do XZ. Now you can't see it, it's underneath there, so we might as well just pull it up so we can see it. So to use this now in the vertex map, let's go to the vertex map, the correct one, and just bring in the circle. And this time we're going to leave the spline shape to curve, but I'm going to change the distance mode to use radius instead. And I'm going to stretch this out a little bit. So instead of 8, 10, let's do around 20. 19 is fine. Now the location of this circle now, it makes a difference. So if I pull this up, you can see that the effect lessens. And here it's going to increase, and then it's going to decrease again. So I'm going to set this to y to be -1. I think it's going to be good. And let's see how this is actually affecting the actual displacer now. So let's go to the displacer ring, to the fall off, and let's bring in this vertex map. Let's click away so you can see that we have this. Now, this is obviously way too perfect. So I'm going to add that same shader field to this vertex map. I'm going to just bring in this shader field on top. And to have them interact together, I'm going to use overlay again. So now it's a lot more irregular. And if I enable this displacer base, and let me just move the circle around so you can see the kind of effect that we're going to get. Let's click away from the vertex map. And I want to be careful so I don't move it on the wrong axis here. But this is the effect that we're going to get. like so. So let's set a couple of keyframes here. I'm gonna go to frame 0 and to the position for this circle. And I'm gonna set X to 119 and then Z to 5. And set keyframes. In fact, I'm just gonna set keyframe for X. And then I'm gonna go all the way to 155. And on 155, I'm gonna move across like this. And let me set this to be minus 155. Something like that. And let's set a keyframe. Now I want this to be a linear keyframe, so I can just right-click Animation, Show Track. Just want to make sure that this is a linear keyframe, like so. So let me see everything together at this point. So from frame 0, everything is now active. And now there's the logo. And this is the base setup for the whole displacement. Now we're going to use this as a driver for all the particles. So let's start doing that. Let's get a X particles, an XP system. Like so. Now for the emitter here, let's get some room. Under the object tab, we are going to use an object, and the object's going to be the plane. And I want to emit from a texture, so I'm going to set this to be texture. And I'm going to switch one more thing here. I'm going to change the particle direction from normal to Phong normal. And that's just going to make it smoother. You can experiment with this, but this is going to make it a lot smoother. So you have kind of these columns going down there. It just looks nicer, at least in my opinion. You can play around with that. So the texture we're going to use, I already prepared a texture. So let me put that on top of the plane. And to see what this texture looks like, I'm going to hit NQ. So this is what this texture looks like. And this is just a texture that I built in Substance Designer. You can use any kind of image or even noise. Now, I prefer not to use the standard noises in Cinema 4D for this, because we could build it with a layer shader, but the layer shader doesn't really work that well with texture emission like this. So it's better to build it some outside of Cinema 4D and then bring it in. Or you can build a layered noise structure and then bake it out. So that choice is yours. So let me go in here and I'm going to do one more thing. So I loaded that image. You can see that in just a standard color channel. I also want to enable the luminance. Actually, I don't need to have it enabled, but I want to make sure that I add a color. And I'm going to uncheck it. We don't need to have it activated to see the values. So X particles can see the values of the luminance, even though it's not active. And I just want to have the emission be the same everywhere on this plane. So that's why I did that. I'll say, so let's go back to the XP emitter. And let's bring this one into the texture tag. Now the emit channel, I'm going to do luminance. So it's all the same, no difference. The color channel is going to be the color. Perfect. Let's go to emission now. And the emission mode, let's set this to shot. And for now, let's leave the shot count at 1,000. Now I'm going to bring this up to 1.5 million in the end. Now, in order to get anything that looks like sand, you need a load of particles. But it renders fairly quickly, even though we have so many particles. So it's not that bad. I don't want any speed. This is all going to be driven, like the movement of the particles now is going to be driven by the displacement we just set up. Let's leave radius at 3 for now. I'm going to bring this down to 0.5 later on. But for now, let's leave it. And let me hide the plane. We don't need to see it. In fact, let's hide the logo as well. We don't need to see that either. In fact, let's hide the fields as well. So it's a much cleaner viewport. And let's hide the circle. There you go. Okay. So if I play back now, it's a little hard to see because these are dots. So let's go to the XP emitter and let's just change under the display. Let's change this from dots. Let's do boxes. And let's do this again. So now you can see a lot better. And so right now it works. It emits on the plane. However, it's not following the displacement. So the way we're going to use the displacement now is, let's go to modifiers and add a, under motion modifiers, let's add follow surface. And there you go. And in the follow surface, we need to tell what object to follow, and we want to use that plane. Let's bring it in there. And let's just play it back and see what we get. So now you can see that it's moving with that displacement that we set up. Let's look at this from a different angle. Now, one thing that's going to make this a lot more interesting is if we have the particles actually rotating. So if I go back to the emitter and go to extended data, I want to enable use rotation, and then to follow the direction that the particles go, we can set it to tangential. And if we play this back now, you're going to see a pretty big difference. This makes a big difference with this. Looks a lot more interesting. And just imagine 1.5 small sand particles with this. Now, one thing I also want to do is, if I look at this from the side, now, when we have tiny little particles, we actually want to have some sort of illusion of depth. And then one way we can do that is to just have a little bit of variation in the offset here. I'm going to offset this to 1. We don't really have to offset it because we're not going to look at the plane anyway. But let me just set this to a higher value so you can see what this is going to do. And so if I play this back now, you can see with that offset, we have a lot more variation. Now, I don't want a lot of variation in the end. I just want to have 0.5. Remember, these are going to be tiny particles. But this is pretty good. Look at this from this angle so we can see a little better. So on top of this, I just want to add a bit of color change. And we can do that if we go and use a XP color. I'm going to pull this up. And I'm going to use a shader again. And you can use any kind of noise you want to use or an image that you have. When I made this base image, I created a reverse option that I'm going to use in this case. I'm going to go to shader. I'm going to say load image, and then I'm going to do this reversed option. It's the same that I created. I just reversed the colors. Let's do that. And set color immediate. We're going to do that. However, we want to go to fall off, and this is where we want to use. Let's start with the logo. Let's call this one XP color logo. So for the fall off, we want to use that vertex map. And I think it's this guy. Yep. So let's use this guy. And let's just play it back and see what we get. So now you can see we are changing color where the vertex map is active. Now I don't want to change that much. I just want to have a little bit of color variation. And this threshold slider dictates how many of them are going to be affected. And to be honest, this one, you really have to go almost all the way to the end to see an effect. Now, if you go to 100%, you're not going to see any change at all. But if I even take this to, say, 98, you can see that the set color has a big impact. All right. So I'm going to set this to 99. And then I'm just going to duplicate this and control drag this up. And this is going to be XP color, and this is for the circle displacement. So let's go to fall off and get rid of this guy, and let's replace it with the other one, which is this one. And I'm going to leave everything as they are. So let's just play this back. So we have a little bit of color shift, like so. And obviously play around with this. Now you can get very different looks, and you get a much better idea when these particles are smaller. In fact, let's try that. Let's go to XP emitter under the emission. Let me set this to the actual radius. I'm going to do 0.5 and then variation of 0.5. But instead of 1,000, let's do 50,000. So now you can get a much better sense of what's going to happen. All right, so I'm going to go back to the color circle here, the XP color. I think even 99 is too much. I'm going to do 99 point, I don't know, 6. Let's try 99.6. Yeah, that's a little better. Okay, I'm going to cache this and move on to rendering. Before I cache, of course, I need to up the count. So in the XP emitter, under the emission tab, I'm going to set the count to 1.5 million particles. And the display, let's go and set this to dots again. And let me get an other objects, an XP cache. And I'm going to use an external folder for this. Let me set that up. I have it here. Here. That's good. And then I'm just going to build this cache. And I'll be back once it's done. Okay, so the project is cached. Took 11 minutes and around 18 gigs of data was cached. Let me go to the very first frame. I hit G. I'm gonna go to the first frame. And let me twirl up some elements here that we don't need to see. So I'm gonna twirl this up. And I'm gonna twirl this up. Now I do have some elements. Let me pull this below. I do have some elements already prepared. So if I twirl this down and unhide these objects, let me just zoom out here. So we have 2 lights set up, and I have a camera, 50 millimeter camera with just some depth of field set up. So let me look through that camera. So this is the camera angle. I also have just a tiny cube for rendering, as I call it. And that's just a cube 1 by 1 by 1 that I'm going to use as a sand particle. Now you can play around with this and use different shapes as well. But a cube is very fast to render. It also gives very different reflections depending on how it's rotated. So that's why I chose a cube. So let me go to, actually we need to see the XP system. So let me go to the XP emitter. And I'm going to render this with Redshift. But the principles are going to be very similar for Cycles 4D or for Octane or any other renderer. So I'm going to right click on the emitter and I'm going to go to Redshift. Somewhere, someone on it. Redshift object. And under particles, I'm going to set this to a custom object. And then I'm going to take this little tiny sphere, bring it into the custom objects. And I know I want to bring it down in size to 0.4, so I'm going to do that. And let's make a color, create, redshift, materials, and then we have conveniently a particle setup. So let me just open that node tree. And let's see what it looks like. So basically it's just particle color user data, and it's pulling in the particle color and set up for us. And into it just a standard redshift material. So let me put that, well actually let me put that on the emitter and we'll see what happens. I'm gonna go to the redshift render view and I'm just gonna hit play. And it's all gray. So here's one of the little gotchas. When you use custom particles, you want to make sure that you put this material on the object itself. So now if I play this back, I should get some colors. And well, it is working. Now, if you want this less or more shiny, more reflective, what we can do is we can go into the material, and for the RS material, you can play around with the IOR. So the lower you go here, the less reflective it's going to be. And then the higher you bring this, the more reflective it's going to become. So I think I'm going to do something like 0.3. I think is pretty good. Like so. So let me pick a different frame where we can actually see the reveal of the logo. So let's say 110 perhaps. And then I'm going to hit play just so we can see what it looks like. So that's what it looks like when the logo is revealed. And that's the end of this tutorial. I hope you can come up with some cool stuff with these techniques. And if you want the project files, you can get them on velocitypeak.com. I'll see you next time.